The ENEMIS tried to humble the black maid, until she spoke Korean into her radio chapter 1. The humiliation, the VIOLATIONHAON Grand Hotel, Executive Floor Corridor, 9:14 and the morning started the way mornings on the 42nd floor always started, in silence so thick it had a texture. Amara moved her cart with practiced efficiency, collecting linens from the service trolley, counting minibar replacements, keeping her footsteps exactly light enough to be inaudible. She wore her hair pulled back, her uniform pressed to a crease you could cut paper on, her white gloves spotless. She had just rounded the corner toward Suite 4215 when the door opened, and Victoria Lim stepped out. Victoria Lim was the kind of beautiful that had been extensively maintained. She was the wife of a Singaporean investor staying in the neighboring suite, and she had spent the last 3 days treating the executive floor like a stage and everyone on it like set dressing. She looked at Amara the way one looks at furniture that has been placed inconveniently. The witness Han Jun-seo had been awake since 5. He had been on calls since 5:15. He was, at this moment, standing beside his suite door reviewing a contract on his tablet when he heard the voice in the corridor, the first voice, the one dripping with manufactured grievance, and paused. He listened. He did not make a sound. He watched, through the 4-inch gap, as the woman in the white uniform stood in a corridor that smelled of fresh linen and yesterday's gardenia arrangement, and absorbed the kind of language that people like Victoria Lim believed was their right to deploy simply, because power had always worked that way in every room they'd ever entered. Jun-seo had spent 15 years in rooms where power worked every possible way. He recognized each of them. He also recognized composure. Real composure, not performance, the kind that lives in the spine of a person who has decided at some point that they will not be reduced by anyone ever, even when the cost of that decision is paid in silence. He stepped back from the door. He picked up his radio, the secondary one, the one connected to his head of operations, not the hotel system. He pressed the call button once. Chialsu. Find out everything about the woman on Victoria Lim's team. Husband, finances, the Singapore property, all of it. Give it to legal by noon. He released the button. Then he went back to his contract. He said nothing yet. Jun-seo never moved before he was ready. Chapter 2. The RADIOTHE Revelation Grand Hotel, Linen Storage Afternoon. The linen storage room on 42 was where Amara went when she needed 60 seconds to herself. It smelled of fresh cotton and the faint ghost of the lavender sachets that were replenished every Thursday. Nobody came here between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. She had discovered this in her 3rd week and had been using it like a confessional ever since. She sat on an overturned supply crate and let out the breath she'd been holding since 9:14. She was not the kind of woman who wept. She had stopped being that kind of woman sometime around her 23rd year, when she'd learned that tears in this industry were professional suicide and grief in public was something only people with safety nets could afford. She was 29 now, and her safety net had always been her own spine, but her hands were shaking. Just slightly. Just enough to matter. She picked up the hotel radio clipped to her apron, the standard issue 1, channel 6, housekeeping frequency, and switched it to channel 11 by habit. Channel 11 was the executive concierge line. She wasn't supposed to have access to it. She'd been accidentally switched to it during her 2nd week and had never reported the error, because the conversations she'd occasionally overheard had told her, in great detail, exactly how the hotel's power structure actually functioned behind the gold leaf facade. Today, Channel 11 was quiet. She exhaled. She was about to switch back when a voice came through, calm, low, and speaking in Korean. The pivot moment. Tell Suite 4213 their reservation at Dongwon has been canceled. Family matter. No further explanation, effective immediately. Amara stared at the radio. Then she replied in Korean automatic before her professional brain could stop her personal one. Suite 4213 is still on property. You'll want to wait until checkout at 11 to avoid a scene in the lobby. Silence on the line, long enough that she had time to realize in vivid and terrible clarity exactly what she had just done. Then the voice came back, slower this time, with a different quality, no longer issuing instructions but asking a question. Who is this? Her thumb hovered over the disconnect. Instead, she heard herself say steadily in clear and unaccented Korean, housekeeping, executive floor. And if you're planning systemic action against that woman, you should also know she's been photographing the corridor layout since yesterday. I don't know why, I thought it might be relevant. Another silence then. Room number. I don't have a room. I have a cart. This time the pause was different. Not operational, something closer to surprised. The voice said in precise, measured Korean, "Stay on property. I'd like to speak with you." The line clicked off. Amara looked at the radio for a long moment. Then she straightened her uniform, stood, and went back to work. She had a cart to finish. Suite 4201. 1 hour later, Han Jun-seo's head of security, Park Cheol-soo, appeared in the doorway of the suite with the expression he wore when something had happened that fell outside his operational categories. Cheol-soo. The woman who responded on 11, Jun-seo. I know, bring her. Cheol-soo. She's not asking to come. Jun-seo looked up from his monitor for the first time in 40 minutes. Jun-seo. Then ask her politely. Chapter 3. The room where power livesthe encounter Suite 4201, late afternoon Suite 4201, was the hotel's most expensive accommodation and looked it, but not in the way most expensive accommodations looked expensive. There was no gold, no excess. The furniture was spare and dark, and the view was the point. Seoul spread to the horizon like a map of everything that mattered, the Han River catching the low afternoon light in long, copper strokes. Amara had been in this suite 14 times in 11 months. She had changed the linen, replenished the minibar, replaced the orchid on the entry table when it began to turn. She had never been asked to sit down. Han Jun-seo gestured to the chair across from him without preamble. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice, 37, perhaps 38, with the kind of face that had been organized by discipline rather than ease. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket, sleeves rolled. He looked like someone who had been working for a long time and had no intention of stopping. He studied her with the focused neutrality of someone accustomed to assessing risk. She studied him back. Jun-seo. You're Korean, Amara. My mother is from Gwangju. She came to London in '92. She made sure I knew the language before I knew how to use a fork properly. Jun-seo. And the hotel frequency, channel 11, is restricted. Amara, I know. It was an assignment error in my second week. I should have reported it. I didn't. Jun-seo. Why not? She considered. There was a version of this answer that was professionally safe and a version that was true. She gave him the true one because he had the kind of attention that would detect the difference. Amara, because information is the only currency that doesn't get taken from you at the end of a shift. He was quiet for a moment. Jun-seo. The photograph she was taking, the corridor layout. Amara, East Wing service access, the loading bay door schedule. She was methodical about it. Used a compact camera disguised as a perfume bottle. I've seen that model before. It's not consumer grade. This landed differently than she'd expected. The neutrality in his face did not change, but something behind it recalibrated. Jun-seo. You've seen surveillance equipment before, Amara. I worked 3 years in corporate security consulting in London before I came here. I left the industry. It left a few things behind. The dynamic shift leaned back slightly. The posture of someone who has just revised a working assumption. Jun-seo. Why are you here, in this hotel, in this job? She looked at him steadily. Because I needed to disappear for a while and maids are invisible. She paused. Or were supposed to be. She watched something cross his face, quick and complicated, the expression of a man who has just understood something he wasn't expecting to understand. Jun-seo. The woman this morning in the corridor. Amara. Victoria Lim. Yes. Jun-seo. I heard what she said to you. Amara said nothing. Jun-seo. You didn't react. Amara. I reacted, just not where anyone could see it. Another silence. The city burned copper outside the glass. Jun-seo. The information about the camera, you could have kept it, used it as leverage for yourself. Amara. I could have. Jun-seo. Why didn't you? She met his gaze. Because whoever she's photographing for isn't interested in me. And I'd rather be on the right side of whatever's coming than hold a card I don't fully understand. Han Jun-seo looked at Amara Osei for a long moment. Then he made a decision that his security chief would later describe in a private debrief as the most operationally consequential thing his employer had done in 4 years. Junseo, I need to show you something, and then I need to ask you a question. She folded her white-gloved hands in her lap. Amara, I'm listening. Chapter 4. The Bigger Picture. The Emerging THRATSUITE 4201 Operations Table. Evening. Chiaosu laid out the monitoring array on the suite's secondary table. 4 screens, a satellite relay, a secure messaging terminal. Amara looked at it with the recognition of someone who has seen this kind of setup before, which was precisely the reaction Junseo had been watching for. She did not pretend not to recognize it. Another point in her column. Junseo, Victoria Lim's husband Lee Byung-jun, is not an investor, he's a front. The capital he manages belongs to a man named Chairman Oh. Oh has been attempting to acquire leverage over 3 organizations in this city for 18 months. My organization is one of them, Amara, and the camera, Junseo, was mapping our security rotation, which means someone on staff told them which floor we were on and when our team cycles. Amara processed this. You have a leak inside the hotel. Junseo, yes, Amara, and you need someone who can move on that floor without triggering it. Silence confirmed it better than words would have. She looked at the screens, at the photographs, at the operational precision of a threat that had been building quietly, the way the worst threats always do in the margins of ordinary life. Amara, you're asking me to work for you. Junseo, I'm asking you to consider whether what you're doing now is actually what you came here to do. Amara's internal conflict. She stood and walked to the window. Seoul at dusk was a different city than Seoul in daylight, less curated, more honest, the neon bleeding upward into a sky the color of an old bruise. She had come to this city because it was her mother's city, and because she had needed somewhere that held no shape of her former life. She had taken this job because it was available, and because the work was clean, and because she had told herself she was done with the other kind. Had been lying to herself. She'd known it within a week. Some people are built for certain work the way certain instruments are built for certain music. You can set them aside. They don't stop being what they are. Amara, I want 3 things. 1. My current position is protected regardless of outcome. 2. I have full authority to abort if the exposure level crosses a threshold I define. 3. She turned from the window. If this goes sideways and I need to move, your organization facilitates it. No questions, no delays. Junseo held her gaze. Junseo, agreed, all 3. Amara, then we should talk about the service schedule for tomorrow. The leak, whoever they are, will be on shift. I have a theory about which corridor they're using to pass information. Undisclosed location. Simultaneous. Chairman Oh was not a man who appeared in photographs. He existed in the spaces between documented things, in wire transfers that moved through 7 jurisdictions, in meetings that happened in vehicles, in decisions that arrived without origin. He sat across from Lee Byung-jun with the patience of a man who has never once needed to raise his voice. Chairman Oh, the camera data, Byung-jun. Victoria had to abort early. There was a staff member, Chairman Oh. Which staff member? Byung-jun. Housekeeping. Black woman. Executive floor. Oh was quiet for a moment. And Han Junseo's response, Byung-jun, no visible response. He didn't move the team, didn't change the rotation. Oh almost smiled. Almost, Chairman Oh, no visible response means he's already moving. Find out who she is. The Maid, Chapter 5. The language of GHOSTSTHE competence REVEALHAON Grand Hotel, executive floor. The next morning Amara went back to work. This was the part that people who had never done this kind of work never understood. The going back. The returning to the ordinary. The cart, the gloves, the measured footsteps, the greeting that was warm without being familiar. Amara moved through the executive floor exactly as she had every morning for 11 months and watched everything with eyes that had been watching everything all along, only now with permission. She had identified 3 candidates for the leak by 6 a.m. by 8. She had narrowed it to 1. The discovery. His name was Sung-won. He worked the service elevator, 26 years old, 3 years in the hotel. He was careful and quiet, and he had the specific tells of a person operating under instruction. The fractional hesitation before he responded to direct address, the way his eyes moved to access points when he thought no one was watching, the fact that he took his break at 8:47 every morning and returned at 9:04, which was 4 minutes longer than the route from the staff room to the break area required. On the second morning, Amara followed the 4 minutes. He used a service panel on the 39th floor, an access point for building maintenance, and she watched him photograph a scheduling document through the panel's ventilation gap with a device no larger than his thumbnail. He was good. She had worked with people who were good. She had been better. She did not confront him. She photographed him photographing the document. Then she went back to her cart and raised Jun Seo on channel 11. Your leak is Park Sung-won. Service elevator team. He uses the maintenance panel at 39F. I have documentation. He's working for someone who wanted your rotation schedule, which means they're planning a physical approach, not just surveillance. You should move your team within 12 hours. A pause. Where are you? Currently restocking minibar in 4208. The lady in 4208 drinks a great deal of Perrier. She thought she heard something, not quite a laugh, something adjacent to one. Come to the suite when you're done. I have 4 more rooms on my rotation. Amara. Her name in his voice was a new thing, careful and precise the way he said everything. Come when you're done, he said. Please. She restocked the Perrier and finished her 4 rooms. Then she went. Suite 4201. Morning. Cheol-soo had already pulled Sung-won from rotation by the time she arrived. The young man was in a security room on the 30th floor, cooperative in the way people become cooperative when the walls of a situation close in all at once. He had been recruited 4 months ago. A debt, his mother's medical bills, classic architecture. The people who had recruited him had known exactly which door to knock on. The organization he reported to was Chairman O's, Jun Seo. They're moving faster than projected. If they were ready to attempt a physical approach, Amara, they weren't ready yet. The rotation document Sung-won photographed was the old schedule. I swapped the current one 2 days ago when I did the floor manager's filing. What he photographed is useless. Silence in the room had a particular quality. Cheol-soo. Quietly, she swapped the schedule 2 days ago. Amara, I told you I had a theory about the corridor. I didn't wait for confirmation to start working it. Jun Seo looked at her. Something in his face was doing something complicated that he was managing with considerable effort. Jun Seo, you ran a counter-operation, independently, on your second day. Amara, I ran a precaution. There's a difference. Jun Seo, is there? There is, she said. A precaution is what you do when you're not sure yet. A counter-operation is what you do when you are. She looked at him. I'm sure now. Chapter 6. The Systemic COLLAPSETHERETRIBUTONSUIT 4201. That evening the retribution, when it came, looked nothing like retribution. That was the point. Jun Seo did not move like a man who was angry. He moved like a man who was solving a problem with the appropriate tools, which was, Amara was beginning to understand exactly what he was. He made 3 calls. None of them lasted longer than 90 seconds. She sat across the operations table and listened to half of each conversation, the half conducted in Korean because the other halves were in Mandarin and Japanese, and constructed the whole from the parts she could hear. The first call, to a financial institution in Singapore. Someone on the other end used the phrase voluntary review in a tone that suggested the review would not be voluntary. The second call, to a legal firm in Seoul. A brief reference to 3 documented instances of securities misrepresentation. The name Lee Byung-jun, delivered without inflection. The third call was different, shorter. He spoke very quietly and she caught only one phrase, which she did not fully understand but which made Cheol-soo behind her exhale slowly through his nose in the way a person exhales when they have just heard something significant. The collapse begins the following morning. The Lim party had checked out. Not at their scheduled time, early, in a hurry, with the specific energy of people who have received news that has made their current location feel untenable. Victoria did not look at anyone on the way out. She stared at her phone. Lee Byung-jun walked slightly ahead of her, which told Amara everything about the nature of their partnership. By noon, a financial compliance notice had been filed with 3 regulatory bodies simultaneously across Singapore, Hong Kong, and Seoul, connected to a pattern of transactions that had been, apparently, documented in considerable detail for some time, simply waiting for a moment like this one. By evening, Chairman O's primary holding company had frozen assets pending review. It was, Amara thought, watching it unfold from the quiet of the 42nd floor, like watching a building that had always had a crack in its foundation finally asked to bear the right kind of weight. It did not fall dramatically. It simply ceased to be able to stand. The confrontation Victoria returned, she almost missed it. She was in the service corridor when she heard the voice, sharp, agitated, at the front desk 20 feet away, demanding a room that had already been released. Victoria Lim had come back, not with her husband, alone, without luggage, with the wide-eyed, barely managed energy of a woman who has just discovered that the financial ground she stood on was not as solid as she'd been assured. Amara stepped out of the service corridor. Victoria saw her. A flash of recognition, then the instinct to martial superiority, and then something else, something newer, crossing her face like a weather system. Victoria, you're your staff here. You work housekeeping. Amara, I do. Victoria looked at her, really looked the way she had not bothered to look the first time. Victoria, what happened to my husband's accounts? Amara, I wouldn't know anything about that, ma'am. She looked at Victoria Lim standing in the lobby of the Hyung Grand Hotel, stripped of the architecture of her certainty, and felt no particular triumph. She had learned a long time ago that retribution felt different in practice than in anticipation. It did not feel like victory. It felt like a door closing on something that should have been closed long ago. Amara, the lobby bar is open until midnight. I'd suggest sitting down. She returned to her cart. She had 3 more rooms on her rotation. Chapter 7. What she actually isthe identity reveal. Suite 4201. Night. Jun Seo found her on the 42nd floor balcony at 10 p.m., in her uniform still, looking at the city the way she always looked at the city, like she was reading it. He had spent the last 3 hours on calls. The O situation was contained. The regulatory proceedings would take months, but the momentum was irreversible. The threat to his organization was neutralized. His security chief had presented a full debrief in 18 minutes and had included, without comment, a 2-paragraph operational assessment of the housekeeping employee on the executive floor. The assessment used the word exceptional twice and the phrase unconventional asset deployment once. Chialsu did not use words lightly. Jun Seo, you told me you left corporate security consulting. Amara, I did. Jun Seo, what level? She looked at him sideways. Does it matter, Jun Seo? It matters to me. A pause. The city below them did its city things, moved, breath, generated light. Amara, senior analyst, I worked protective intelligence. 3 years London, 1 year Brussels, 6 months Seoul. The Seoul contract ended badly, not professionally, personally. I needed to disappear from a particular version of my life, and the fastest way to become invisible is to become a maid. People look through you. You see everything. Jun Seo, and did it work? Disappearing, Amara, for 11 months. He stood beside her and they looked at the city together. Jun Seo, what you did with the schedule, the Sungwon identification, the Channel 11 intercept, you weren't helping me, you were working a case. Amara, I was helping you, I was also working a case. Both can be true. The question. Jun Seo, I want to offer you a position, formally. Not a cover, not a temporary arrangement. Role with full scope, compensation appropriate to your actual experience and the resources to do the work correctly. She turned to look at him. Amara, you don't know me. Jun Seo, I know what I've seen in 48 hours. Amara, that's not enough. Jun Seo, no, it's not. He looked back at the city. Jun Seo, but it's more than I've seen from most people in 48 months. She was quiet for a long time. Amara, I'll need to know the full scope of what your organization does. The actual scope. Not the briefing version. Jun Seo, that's reasonable, Amara, and I'll need 2 weeks to decide. No pressure applied, no consequences if I decline. Jun Seo, also reasonable, Amara, and I want to finish my shift tonight. He blinked. For the first time since she'd met him, something genuinely surprised crossed his face. Jun Seo, your shift? Amara, I have 42:19 and 42:23 left. The gentleman in 4223 takes his tea at 10:30, and if it's late, he doesn't sleep well. Han Junseo looked at Amara Osei, former protective intelligence analyst, current executive floor housekeeper, operational mind sharp enough to run a counterintelligence precaution on her second day, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll make the tea. You do 4,219. She considered this. "Amara, can you make tea?" Junseo. "I run an organization with 17 active operations across 12 countries. I can make tea." She handed him the service card for 4223 and went to finish her shift. Chapter 8. The maid who was never a maid. The Hyun Grand Hotel, executive floor, 2 weeks late. She gave him her answer at the end of her last shift. The 2 weeks had been ordinary in the way that only the period directly after extraordinary things can be ordinary, weighted, self-conscious, each mundane action carrying the awareness of an approaching threshold. She had changed linen and restocked minibars and delivered tea, and she had thought carefully and completely about every version of what came next. She had also, because she could not help it, quietly run background assessments on the Han organization through channels she technically no longer had access to, but practically still did, because certain professional relationships persist beyond the end of the contract that created them. What she found confirmed the briefing version, and then exceeded it in several directions she had not fully anticipated. They were not clean. No organization that operated in the spaces the Han organization operated in could be clean, but they were principled in the specific way she had learned to distinguish from unprincipled. They chose their methods intentionally, they defined their limits and held them, and the people inside were treated as people. She had worked for worse. She had worked for people who called themselves better. The lobby moment, the face slap reversal. She was finishing the last items on her cart in the East Wing corridor when she heard the voice. A new guest, arrived that morning, corporate booking. The kind of voice that carried because it had always been permitted to carry, speaking to one of the younger housekeeping staff. A girl named Hyun who was 17 months into her first hospitality job and had not yet developed the full armor for it. The content of what was being said did not matter. The architecture of it was familiar. Amara had stood on Hyun's side of it 2 weeks ago. She walked to the end of the corridor. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She had learned something very specific in the last 2 weeks about what changes when you stop performing invisibility. It is not that you become louder. It is that the room reorganizes itself around you. Amara, sir. This is the executive floor of the Hyun Grand. The standards on this floor apply to guests as well as staff. I'd be happy to connect you with management if you'd like to discuss them. Man looked at her uniform. He was the kind of man who made assessments in seconds and acted on them immediately, which was useful in some contexts and catastrophic in this one. Guest. And who are you? Behind her, she heard the elevator open. She heard Chialsu's footsteps. She had learned to identify them in 2 weeks the way you learn any sound that means safety. And then, behind him, quieter, the footsteps she had learned first. She did not turn around. Amara. I'm the person who manages this floor. Man looked past her at the 2 men who had just arrived in the corridor. He looked at Junseo specifically, at the quality of attention Junseo carried, which was the quality of someone for whom the word authority was not a performance, and the certainty on his face underwent a rapid and visible revision. Junseo. To the guest, mild and precise. Is there a problem? Guest. No, no problem. Junseo. Good. The guest returned to his room. Hyun, behind Amara, let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 2 minutes. Later, after the shift, after the debrief. After Chialsu had distributed the revised onboarding documents for the new position and the contract had been reviewed and the logistics had been organized, Junseo found Amara in the linen storage room. She was sitting on the overturned supply crate. She had changed out of her uniform. She was holding the radio, the old one, the housekeeping issue 1, channel 6, Junseo. Sentimental, Amara. Practical. I want to remember where I was standing when this started. He leaned against the doorframe. Channel 11, Amara. Channel 11, Junseo. You spoke Korean into a radio and told me my operation had a leak. Amara, and you didn't hang up, Junseo. No, she turned the radio over in her hands. 11 months of carrying it. 11 months of listening to a world that did not know she was listening. Amara. My mother used to say that the best thing about her language was that people underestimated who was using it. She said invisibility was sometimes a choice, not a condition. She set the radio on the shelf. She would leave it here. She did not need it anymore, Amara. She was right about most things. She stood. She looked at the door, at the city she could not see from here but knew was waiting. Seoul, her mother's city, her city, sprawling and lit and full of the specific density of a place that holds many things at once. Amara, ready. Han Junseo held the door. Amara Osei, protective intelligence analyst, former corporate ghost, 11-month executive floor housekeeper, the woman who had spoken Korean into a radio and redirected the entire arc of two organizations' fates, walked out of the linen room and into the rest of her life. The door closed behind them on the shelf. The radio sat in the dark and was quiet. It had done its work. End next. Please subscribe.